My co-author and lead author for this paper, Anne-Catherine Reinl from the European University Institute in Florence, has a message, which is this is a work in progress, so please be gentle. We're going to talk about some of the drivers, perhaps, of political participation, and think a little bit more deeply into what we can find based on part of the ActEU survey. So just to set the scene on this, we find, as we've heard in other presentations today, the level of discontent, negative attitudes. There are signals, at least among some groups and in some countries in the EU, of a rise in this kind of form of political discontent, growing polarization as well. That's something we'll get into a little bit more on the next panel. But just that we find that this is increasingly the case. And so given these conditions, citizens have, broadly speaking, two choices. They can either exit the political arena, remain silent, perhaps become one of these members of this disaffected group that we were talking about earlier, or alternatively, they can raise their voice, they can engage politically, and particularly engage in some form of protest or informal participation. So how to do this, and how should we think about this, and what might be interesting for us based on our survey to consider? We've seen already a lot of research looking at two different levels, broadly speaking, two groups of factors. Factors at the macro level, this might be the institutions of the different countries that may have some effect on participation, and also factors at the micro level, individual factors. This might be individual political attitudes, perhaps resources like social capital and so on, that can also have an influence on participation. But what we're interested in here is the factors that are in the middle of those two levels, the meso level. So things like the actors involved, the issues involved, and the types of activity that are involved, how these might also influence people's engagement or otherwise in forms of political participation. So this is really our focus here, and hopefully our contribution to the literature. So we start with the research question you can see on the screen. Does the willingness to get politically involved depend on the policy area, the group organizing an activity, or the form of participation? You can see some sort of representations of all three of those factors that we're interested in. And I'll talk a bit more about how we go about measuring that in our survey. So we included what's called a vignette experiment. So it's a little similar to the conjoint experiment that you heard talked about in the previous two presentations. Has a slight difference in that people in the survey, they see a bit more of a story, a bit more of a text that they read, and you can see some examples of that on the screen now. However, each text that each respondent sees is slightly different. So for some respondents, they see a text about climate change. Others will see a text about gender equality. Others about migration. So we vary that issue that's part of the text. We also vary the actors involved in the text. So it may be that respondents read about a group of ordinary citizens, perhaps the opposition, that's the opposition parties in the parliament, or a celebrity, a famous person. We don't specify who this is, just generally a celebrity, and the type of activity that group or that actor is asking people to get engaged upon, to protest about. And so the type of activity involved is either an online petition, a campaign to email MPs, a peaceful demonstration, or the occupation of the Parliament building. So hopefully you see in those 4 types of activity some kind of increasing extremity, some kind of increasing degree of perhaps difficulty, but pressure also that's involved in engaging in that type of activity. So we present the people in the survey with one version of this vignette. They read it, and then they answered. We had a few questions, but the question we're focusing on here today is, how likely is it that you would join this action? And we rank that from 0, extremely unlikely, to 100, extremely likely. So our respondents decide whether they like the sound of this activity or not. So turning to the results of this, and I'll try and explain what we're looking at here. So at the top of the diagram, you can see the effects that we found for the different topics that were included in our vignette. So gender, migration, and climate change. And just to explain, you can see that sort of solid vertical line and then the green horizontal lines. There's an overlap there, and this tells us there isn't any significant effect. So the different issues that we included in the vignette, we get basically the same response, the same likelihood of engagement from our respondents, regardless of what issue is involved in the activity. However, when it comes to the activity itself, the type of activity that we're asking about, we see there's some variation, so some gap between the vertical and horizontal lines there in the blue group that you're looking at. And it's, again, broadly in line with what we might have expected in terms of the pressure that's been applied to the political actors, but also the costs of engagement in this activity. So signing a petition, people were more likely to engage in that activity, slightly less likely to email their MP in protest, and slightly less likely again to demonstrate peacefully. And then a much stronger effect we see, perhaps unsurprisingly, people were even less likely to engage in the occupation of Parliament. What we were actually most interested in starting this research was the role of the actors, the organizers of this activity. Unfortunately, we can see from the results there in the red group, we actually, again, find no particular difference based on who the actors are. And so this is, again, maybe not surprising, but it means we can't really draw strong conclusions about who is trying to organize, who is trying to mobilize supporters for the activity. Based on this, we find no difference between whether that is a celebrity, the opposition parties, or just a group of ordinary citizens. So this is the preliminary findings. From this, we might draw some conclusions, at least, that the lower cost activities seem to be more attractive to respondents. So things like signing a petition versus occupying Parliament, which would be highly costly, but they seem to be equally likely to engage on a range of issues with a range of different organizing actors. As I said, this is very much a work in progress. I know we have a lot of experts on political participation here in the room as well, so I'm really open to any questions or comments from you or anyone else. We have a few more steps to go, so looking at different subgroups of our respondents, depending on maybe their age, gender, also the countries that we looked at. There are actually 10 countries involved here, so we might see some variation there too. But all of this analysis, this is for future step of our research. So that's all from me. Thanks very much for listening. Looking forward to your questions.